Savant. Noun. A person of learning, especially one with detailed knowledge in some specialized field.
A lot of people consider themselves good at something. Whether it's the job they are paid for, the sport that they play, or the hobby they practice, most people on Earth would claim to be at least competent at a given skill. But even more compelling than being good at something, for many, is being the best. The spirit of competition is almost synonymous with being human, a fact that's in part due to how consistently rewarding it is. You want a promotion? You have to be the best for the job. You want to win the trophy? You have to be the best player. You want to be paid for your art? You have to be recognized as one of the best artists.
Something very similar. He said, if you can do anything, it doesn't matter what it is, if you can do anything better than everyone else in the world, people will try to break down your doors to meet you. Now, how does that happen?
Being the best is an inherently competitive trait. It means that you're better than everyone else. Even in activities that have a lot of artistic variation, such as hyper-realistic painting or rap music, there is still someone regarded as the GOAT, or the greatest of all time. There may be debates about who the GOAT is, but if you've worked and improved enough to even be considered in the ever-present GOAT debate, it's safe to say you've reached the zenith of your craft, the peak of the mountain you've been climbing since you picked up a basketball, a paintbrush, or a skateboard. But then again, sometimes being the greatest at something doesn't equate to worldwide recognition. There are people out there who are practicing to be the greatest in activities so small or niche that they'll never be known further than their immediate circle. It's not about recognition, it's not about fame, it's not about validation. These people practice their craft because of passion and passion alone. They're going to be the best, even if no one knows that they exist. These savants are especially common in the realm of video games, where niche micro-communities are often formed by small groups of people in order to achieve a difficult, and perhaps insignificant, goal. Whether it's building computers in Minecraft or completing GTA 5 without breaking the law, there are always small internet groups willing to devote their hard work, time, and passion to these weird specific hobbies. And among all of these groups, there's two communities in particular that embody the impassioned dedication required to push a pursuit to its limits, overcoming ridiculously difficult challenges with no expectation of a reward. The first of these is a group of people dedicated to using a rocket launcher and controlled propulsion to effectively fly through the air at blinding speeds in a 15-year-old first-person shooter, exploiting every facet of in-game physics they can in order to do so. The second group has taken a series of mechanics and exploits in a party game and used them in unintended ways to move as quickly as possible, accomplishing feats that could never have been foreseen when the game was developed 2 decades ago. These players have even developed new controllers and techniques to effectively overcome the human limit, breaking past medical barriers in an effort to move as efficiently as possible. These two groups have gone widely unacknowledged by the greater population that surrounds them, but that doesn't make their accomplishments any less impressive. The challenges they faced and overcome are as compelling as any others, even though they've received little in return for their efforts. And within each of these two communities, there is a person regarded as the best, an individual who's accomplished the most, pushed their community the furthest, or had the most positive influence, the king of the hill, the cream of the crop, the one above the many. But despite their efforts, both of these players would be ripped from atop their mighty thrones. One fell due to his own hubris, while the other was falsely taken down by the very people who put him there in the first place. This is the story of two competitors, and what it took for them to be crowned the greatest of all time. Team Fortress 2 is a game that takes place in a parallel universe to our own. A strange reality where men can be raised by birds, Australia holds the secret to teleportation, and, of course, in 1857 United States President Abraham Lincoln invented the technique known as rocket jumping while attempting to climb a flight of stairs as efficiently as possible. Though this killed the aged Lincoln, that didn't stop hundreds of TF2 players from following in his footsteps, learning and eventually perfecting the art of rocket jumping. Unlike previous games where this technique was present, such as Quake, rocket jumping was intentionally implemented into Team Fortress 2 when it was being developed. It offers an interesting dynamic to movement, allowing for Soldier, one of the game's offensive classes, to utilize his rockets for quick burst movement at the expense of his health. This risk-reward aspect of rocket jumping is what makes it such an engaging mechanic, as expert rocket jumpers will use less rockets to travel, therefore taking less damage and mitigating the downside. This foundation enticed many players to learn rocket jumping, with a select few attempting to utilize its nuances to their absolute apex. The progression of rocket jumping occurred incredibly quickly after Team Fortress 2's initial launch. Since Quake had already come out prior to Team Fortress 2, many players already had experience with rocket jumping, so it was easy for them to learn. This led to tutorials on the mechanic being made as far back as August 2008, less than a year after TF2's initial release. Needless to say, many players were hooked by the mechanic, and a large part of that can be attributed to how much depth was present in the way rocket jumping could be used. Team Fortress 2 was designed with a strong focus on movement and speed, a trait that wasn't common in many shooters at the time. The gameplay of TF2 can sometimes resemble a first-person platformer almost as much as it does a shooter, with how often players are encouraged to make precise jumps and maneuvers in an effort to get an edge on their opponents. This characteristic of the game is due in no small part to the design philosophy of maps in Team Fortress 2, which often featured much more verticality and variance than a lot of other games that were released at the time. That meant that rocket jumping wasn't just present, but it was greatly encouraged by the game itself as the optimal way to traverse much of the game's diverse terrain. Rocket jumping makes players much more adept at handling the treacherous drops of Hightower or traversing the great expanses of Upward. Not to mention, Soldier possesses the second slowest walking speed in the entire game, meaning Soldier players are already going to be looking for a way to optimize their speed to reach the fight as quickly as possible. Between the character the mechanic is attached to and the arenas the mechanic can be used in, starter soldiers are constantly tempted, incentivized to give their time, and their souls to the ancient art of shooting their feet to fly great distances. With the usefulness of rocket jumping came people attempting to push the mechanic to its absolute limits. Over the next several years of TF2's lifespan, advanced rocket jumping techniques were discovered, developed, and perfected. Before long, rocket jumping shifted from just being an in-game tool to being a genuine competitive sport in and of itself. Leaderboards soon formed on servers like the Tempest Network, where aspiring soldiers would compete on jump maps, specialized obstacle courses meant to be traversed by rocket jumping. While many players only use jump maps to prepare their skills for the real game, many would attempt to complete these courses as quickly as possible, competing to see who could reach the finish line the fastest. On the aforementioned Tempest Network, these records were converted into points, and the player with the most points would be crowned atop the global Tempest leaderboard as the best rocket jumper on the planet. For many players, the drive to improve and optimize their rocket jumping movement was a hobby, a means to an end. Their ultimate goal was just to be better in casual play. But for a small segment of players, they saw things differently. Their ultimate goal was to reach the top of that leaderboard, reaching global rank number 1. And one player would, in only 3 years of competition, do just that. Not only would he reach the top spot, but he would hold it for 6 years. This is bastion. Bashi is a European TF2 player who first got his start as a competitive jumper when he was told about the Tempest server network by someone he met on a Russian jump server. Though he was likely only practicing rocket jumping on the server to prepare for the real game, the idea of a leaderboard dedicated to this niche skill piqued his interest, causing him to try out Tempest for the first time. Though he couldn't have known it at the time, this casual mention of a competitive rocket jumping circuit would set Bashi on a nearly decade-long journey, complete with its major highs and crippling lows. He would go on to set his first rocket jumping world record in 2015, on a rocket jumping course called Jump Oats. What must have been an exhilarating achievement for the young speedrunner didn't stand for long, as it was swiftly beaten just days later. Despite how quickly his first record was surpassed, Bashi was hooked. This was the accumulation of what was likely months of practice, and if he took a world record once, he could certainly do it again. Boschi's level of consistency was seen as unbelievable by members of the rocket jumping community. A large part of this was his insane consistency with wall pogos, a technique used to gain additional height from rocket jumping off of a wall. This allowed him an advantage over his competition that granted him dozens of records, especially in his earlier career. He would set records that would stand for years, with many of his records being believed to be unbreakable. During Boschi's rise, he developed new techniques, such as angled b-hopping, a frame-perfect maneuver thought to only be doable with insane amounts of luck. In multiple records, Boschi would utilize this tactic to force the stopwatch to bend to his whim. His skill was fully realized when, 3 years after he first started competing, he was officially ranked as the best rocket jumper in the world, reaching the global rank 1 spot of the Tempest leaderboard. Being the best in the world is something every GOAT achieves at one point in their career, but the true hallmark of being the greatest isn't found in just reaching the top spot. No, the hardest part about being the best is staying there. This, for Boschi, was never a problem. He had a passion for rocket jumping, and he was going to keep doing it, no matter what. So, for the next 6 years, he would continue setting record after record after record, never once leaving his top spot. At Boschi's peak, he held over 300 records at once, making him, truly, the greatest rocket jumper to ever play Team Fortress 2. But with great skill comes great awareness. Put yourself in Boschi's shoes. You're easily the best jumper to ever pick up a rocket launcher. You know just how good you are, how much better you are than your peers. You grind out record after record, but certain times just barely elude you. It's like an itch you can't scratch, a painting on the wall tilted just beyond where it should be. Before long, you begin to see these records as flies, circling in front of your vision. Every time you reach for one to grab it, it zips just beyond your reach. Out of desperation, you begin to look for more unorthodox ways to break these records. You remember that you were given administrator positions on Tempest's server network, and you're the only admin that's consistently active on these servers. A realization hits you. If you could change the rules of the game that you've become so good at, moving the goalposts to make these records easier to achieve, then you could finally kill those flies that have evaded your every attempt. After all, those records should be yours. You have the skill, the ability, where no one else does. If you can't negotiate your way to a world record, perhaps it's time to take it by force. Like many other competitors declared the best in their chosen sport, Boschi would find himself cheating to maintain his dominance over his peers. In February 2021, he was caught red-handed, with video footage showing him literally moving the finish line in a course he was attempting runs in. When this was discovered, it shook the community. Many had come to idolize and greatly respect Boschi for his efforts. Many couldn't believe it were true. Eventually, Boschi came clean, admitting that he had cheated. He was promptly removed from his top spot, stripped of the world records his name had become synonymous with, and banned from any Tempest participation or competition for 18 months. This event sullied Boschi's reputation, and never again would he be held to such great regard. He would later, in an interview with YouTuber Hutwo, articulate the mentality that made the greatest rocket jumper of all time cheat at his passion.
Long story short, I got upset that I couldn't beat some random's time quickly, ended up editing the zones to beat it, and was pretty much abusing admin for similar things. It got into my head. I felt entitled to those times because I had the skill to get them.
I felt entitled to those times because I had the skill to get them. This prideful perception of one's own skill is what causes many competitors to throw their careers away. From Lance Armstrong to Dream, immensely skilled people will do anything to maintain their edge over the competition. There are likely many GOATs wandering the earth right now that have cheated and gone undiscovered. Despite this, their accomplishments go untarnished, as for now they get away with murder, murdering the love of the game they played with such passion. When the best at something cheats, the competition as a whole can feel much less valuable. If someone can get away with something so easily, how much trust can be placed in the next top competitor to maintain full honesty? After all, the last guy didn't do it. Boschi's actions significantly devalued the competitive sport of rocket jumping, an effect that will be felt for years to come. In August 2023, Boschi was unbanned from competition on Tempest. Prior to this, he had already been making a light return to rocket jumping in other adjacent leagues. even setting new, entirely legitimate world records in the process. It was clear that, though his reputation had plummeted, his skill had not. He's still, to this day, one of the most skilled jumpers walking the planet, but alas, by his own admission, he's just not as passionate as he once was. Boschi's skill was undeniable. For a period of 6 years, he was easily the most talented rocket jumper walking the planet. But if you ask most people, being the greatest takes more than just being the most skilled or winning the most trophies. No, Boschi can't be the greatest rocket jumper of all time because, at his highest point, he still cheated. For most people, reputation, more than skill, is what makes or breaks being the greatest of all time. But is that really fair? What if, in an alternate universe, Boschi had been framed for cheating, his reputation had been tarnished, all his accomplishments taken away, but yet he didn't actually do anything wrong? Wouldn't it be more reasonable to judge his accomplishments on their own, disregarding the person who committed them? Of course, in our universe, Boschi did cheat. He cheated an innumerable amount of bonus and trick stages, jump courses seen as additional to the main set of courses that most people play. However, according to his testimony, he didn't cheat a single main course, which are the most competitive records by far. It's obvious that, even without the records he cheated on, he was still head and shoulders above everyone else. So why should his admitted error contradict his place as the greatest rocket jumper of all time? Many would respond that Boschi can't be the GOAT because he knowingly did something wrong, something that completely killed any faith in the competition he had put so much passion into. That's why Boschi, regardless of his skill, regardless of his records, cannot be the greatest of all time. But sometimes the issue of reputation isn't so cut and dry. There is another competitor who, in their chosen passion, was widely regarded as the greatest. However, their reputation was tarnished to an even more significant degree than Boschi's. While Boschi was only banned from his scene for 18 months, this individual was banned indefinitely. And, unlike Boschi, this individual was falsely and illegitimately railroaded out of the very same community he once called home. In the second half of our story, we'll discuss the rise and fall of hacks. Super Smash Bros. Melee is a game that needs little introduction. Despite its initial launch on the Nintendo GameCube, a less than successful console, it's still being widely played across the world over 20 years later. The reason for this is largely due to the grassroots competitive scene that's been built around the game ever since its inception. Similar to Team Fortress 2, it's a game that has a very passionate, die-hard community surrounding it. With the way Melee is often discussed, an oblivious onlooker might think that the game is a standalone title, not related to any of the other Smash Bros. Games that came before or after its release. This distinction makes a lot of sense, and is often made by the community itself. After all, there's people who play Smash Bros.
I was just so surprised by that awesome dash tech.
Yeah. And speaking of your Nair,
Oh my man!
he's so.
Oh my god!
Hey, you're insane.
And then there's people who play Melee.
What?
When comparing Melee's competitive scene to that of any other Super Smash Bros. Title, the main difference most would cite is that Melee is the fastest game in the series. Many newer Smash Bros. Fans who are already used to games like Smash 4 and Ultimate often find Melee a clunky, sensitive, and buggy mess to play. This is because, unlike any other Smash game, Melee has an exceptionally high skill floor and skill ceiling, meaning that players will have to put in hours upon hours of time into the game before they could even be considered competent on a competitive level. The game's tech is so advanced that, similarly to rocket jumping in Team Fortress 2, an entire community has formed around the game's tech alone. The goal of a match for them isn't necessarily to win, but to take your opponent's stock in the coolest, flashiest, and most technically impressive way possible. While the broader competitive scene has its own debate over who the greatest professional player of all time is, there is only one player who could conclusively claim the title of the most technical player of all time. When it comes to Melee's tech skill, Hack's Money is the greatest player of all time. Hack started playing competitive Melee in 2007, when the community was first gaining traction thanks to multiple major tournament circuits being held at the time, such as Genesis, MLG, EVO, and Pound. In fact, the third installment of Pound was the first major tournament that Hax would participate in, playing Captain Falcon. Hax's choice of character fit his playstyle quite well at the time. Captain Falcon is, in many regards, the most iconic Smash Bros. Character across all 5 games. This is due largely to his stylish personality, snappy catchphrases, and, of course, the blinding speed he possesses in his ground movement and attacks. Hax, even at this young of an age, was already gravitating toward flashy, fast-moving characters, an archetype that embodied and perfectly matched the way Hax liked playing Melee. In his first ever tournament, Hax would take Captain Falcon all the way to 9th place at Pound 3, an exceptional achievement considering there were 224 players vying for the same spot. This first tournament would set the course for the remainder of Hax's life. He'd dedicate thousands upon thousands of hours to Captain Falcon, learning not just how to win, but how to win while doing sick, insane stuff like this.
Big deal for Hax. He should have been dead to begin with. Yes. Reset, regrab, back to boost, up smash, back air, welcome back, Hax!
Hax's peak as a player on the rankings would be 6th in the world, an incredible feat considering that he wasn't even playing optimally yet. In 2013, Hax would ditch Captain Falcon entirely for a character that was even faster, even more stylish, and most of all, even more technically difficult. Fox McCloud. Though he's widely considered the best character in Melee, Fox is also usually cited as the most difficult character to play at the highest level. Hax, even over a decade ago, knew this to be true. But he saw it differently. He saw Fox's insanely high skill ceiling as a goal to be strived for, not a challenge to cower from. He was going to push that skill ceiling to its absolute limit, no matter what it took. Hax's switch was a controversial one among members of the Melee community. Many saw it as Hax betraying a character he'd become associated with for better chances at winning in tournaments. However, Hax made it very clear that he simply wanted to see how far he could push not just himself, but the game. To this end, he created the now infamous 20XX thought experiment. The idea was simple. Since Fox is almost untouchable when played perfectly, it would be best to simply play Fox now. That way, the community as a whole will one day progress to a point where everyone plays Melee as optimally as possible. Then, at some undecided year, Melee will reach the point where everyone plays Fox. Hax dubbed this undecided year 20XX, a reference to the Mega Man series, and decided to dedicate himself to achieving 20XX levels of play before anyone else. However, this dedication wouldn't come without a cost. As with the aforementioned Mega Man series, the path of 20XX would be paved with technological augmentations. The human body, in its base state, isn't built to withstand the pressures of optimal Fox gameplay. Hax very soon developed early onset arthritis from hours upon hours of doing the same meticulous frame-perfect movements over and over again. The extreme pressure Hax had put on his hands had resulted in a calcified FCU tendon, an injury so severe and so specific that no surgeon was willing to remove it. It was deemed irreparable. The damage was done. This injury forced Hax into indefinite retirement in April of 2016. After just 3 years of attempting to push Melee to its most optimal level, Hax had seemingly reached the human limit of what he was capable of achieving. He had achieved his goal of reaching the future faster than anyone else, but not at all in the way that he had hoped. However, Hax's passion for Melee couldn't be contained, not by his mind, not by his soul, and certainly not by his body. He wasn't ready to stop, no matter what it took. In absolute defiance of his own athletic mortality, Hax teamed up with some fellow Melee players and started developing a controller to handle the hand pains brought on by constant immersion in Melee's techniques. Dubbed the Box, Hax would pour his heart and soul into this project, even writing an extensive manifesto detailing every single minute benefit, quirk, and facet of the Box's design. 3 years after his initial retirement, in 2019, Hax was back to competing at the national level. This time using his brand new, patented, legal controller. At his lowest point, where it seemed like his own human limit had been reached, Hax found it within himself to push past what any could have thought possible in the realm of technical Melee. Now he was, comfortably and consistently, able to do insanely difficult tech like this.
3-1.
And I'm thinking to myself,
oh my God! Oh, what the optimality, Bobby? Where is he fighting these ideas? What is this?
Not only had Hax overcome his own medical issues, he had developed an ergonomic solution to them that could be used to treat dozens of players suffering from the same issues in the future. all out of a passion from the game and a desire to push it to its absolute apex technical level. Conclusively, in both his impact on the game's future and his abilities as a player, Hax had become the greatest technical melee player to ever live. Unfortunately, on June 4th, 2021, Hax would release a series of videos onto his YouTube channel, and while noble and well-intentioned, they would significantly damage his nearly spotless reputation in the eyes of the melee community. Hax would release several videos directed at the well-known and well-respected top player Leffen. These videos would be less than positive, as Hax passionately advocated that Leffen should be banned for violating many of the guidelines previously set by the community for proper player conduct. While there was plenty of evidence for the charges presented against Leffen, the presentations of the videos were an optical nightmare, especially in the first major video released, titled Evidence.zip 2. Despite how well-informed Hax's evidence usually was, Hax would often utilize this evidence to draw very extreme conclusions about Leffen's character, so extreme that they would be borderline unbelievable to the vast majority of people, and overstep the line of what could be reasonably assumed based off of the information provided. In short, Hax jumped the shark, a mistake that unfortunately would prove fatal to his melee career at large. Though the second major video, Evidence.zip 3, was much better constructed, the video was released 2 months after the previous one, and the community had largely made up their mind in regards to Hax by this point. Hax was labeled mentally unstable and unreliable, with basically all of his accusations being thrown out the window on that basis without any proper refutation. Furthermore, as a result of these videos, Hax was accused of inciting harassment and defamation of character, and promptly banned following the release of Evidence.zip 2. Despite these claims, many of Hax's claims were provably correct, and based entirely on objective fact. For instance, Hax correctly identified multiple instances of targeted harassment made by Leffen against former number 1 player Hungrybox. Hax even went as far as to identify specific instances where Leffen's false statements contributed to a growing negative sentiment developing against Hungrybox, both as a person and as a player.
Water a little bit.
Leffen frequently tweets about, such and such, like, I can't believe this terrible human being. He doesn't say terrible, player, he says terrible human being.
Yeah. It's gotten to that level.
It's gotten to that level. Is killing the game that I love, Leffen's maybe a little bit melodramatic about it, but
maybe a little, but that's what we like about him.
Yeah.
Ironically, the very broken rules that were cited for why Hax needed to be banned were also broken explicitly several times by Leffen, and went completely unpunished by the general community. Just like that, the melee community had unceremoniously kicked Hax out of any competition, stripping him of much of his reputation and influence almost overnight. Despite this, he still puts out regular videos on his YouTube channel regarding melee, and prominent melee players utilize his controller in tournaments, often to great effect. In this regard, his legacy continues to live on, even though he's almost been entirely outcast from the wider melee community. Just like Bashi, Hax's accomplishments will stand, even when his reputation is cut down. So, to that end, how much does one's reputation affect their greatness? I believe that, when it comes to Bashi and Hax, the greatness of their accomplishments surpasses the negative reputation that they have, whether they brought it on themselves or had it brought upon them. When future TF2 players look at Bashi's career, most will see the innovative movement techniques and world records, with the cheated runs being an unfortunate footnote on an otherwise great career. After all, for future players, there's still much to learn from the many records Bashi achieved legitimately. When future melee players look at Hax's career, most will see his innovations in melee's tech, science, and most of all, health. In 10 years, it's unlikely that Hax's optical missteps will hold a candle to the level of impact that his accomplishments have had on the future of the game that Hax loves so much. The box, as a controller, has already had arguably the same, if not greater impact as Hax has had as a player, and that level of greatness isn't something being banned and outcast can just erase. Regardless of the mistakes that both Hax and Bashi have made, they are still undeniably the greatest of their respective pursuits, and justifiably so. Of course, it's important for artists, competitors, and public figures to be held accountable for their respective blunders, but someone's mistakes shouldn't tarnish the importance or relevance of the accomplishments that they've made, especially so when the individual has admitted to and apologized for their blunders. The greatness that Hax and Bashi have achieved supersedes any of their missteps. They have worked so hard, achieved milestones so impressive, that their greatness will continue to live on as long as the communities they've made their mark on continue to exist. And these accomplishments were made with little to no incentive other than their own raw passion. For nearly every goat in every pursuit you could possibly imagine, that raw passion is the core of what drives them to succeed. Almost universally, greatness comes from passion, an innate love for your work that pushes you beyond what you think you're capable of. Though some jobs in life will of course be motivated by external means, such as money or recognition, the greatest and most recognizable achievements are almost always primarily driven by a love for the work. And this love is most exemplified, I believe, by the two people discussed in this video. Even when both of their reputations were completely tarnished, with basically no incentive to keep going, both Hacks and Bashi continued to practice, work, and compete. Greatness is primarily accomplished and maintained through an innate drive and desire to improve and grow, nurtured by an adoration for the work that's been done. That motivation, that passion, is one of the most beautiful things that life has to offer, and the resulting accomplishments should be treasured at all costs. Because when every goat reaches the end of their quest, all they receive in return is the satisfaction they get for their effort. There's no fanfare, no tangible reward. Some don't get recognized as the greatest until long after they're gone. Some of the greatest are never recognized at all. But that's okay. Because when someone becomes the greatest, reaching the end of their quest, they simply have to look down at the mountain they climbed to get there. And for every goat, reaching the peak of that mountain is recognition enough.